Hi everyone, Chitose is finally back after 6 months, and this time her skill build is much stronger than before. If you just pull her, or you've had her since launch, but you weren't sure how to build this character, this guide will walk you through everything you need to know. We'll go over how her kit works, along with her base potentials, teams, emblems, discs, and talent recommendations. And by the end of this video, you will have a clear direction on how to build and play her based on your own account. As for her auto attack build, that will be covered in part 2 coming later. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with how her skill actually works, because this is something a lot of players don't really notice while playing. Chitose's main skill has 3 different versions: the base version, upgraded version, and the enhanced version from her pink potential. To keep things simple, I will call them base, pro, and ultra versions. The base version is straightforward. She just dashes and deals damage. For pro version, it triggers after you use the base version twice, and it also deals higher damage. So even though you are pressing the same skill button, what you get actually depends on how many times you already use it. And that's how her skill works without any potential. Now, this is where the skill build starts to improve her kit. Her pink potential, Cascade of Rune, upgrades the pro version into the ultra version, doubling its damage, and also reduces the requirement from using 2 base versions to only just 1. So instead of using base version, and then pro version, your rotation becomes just base version and then immediately ultra version, which already lets you use the strongest version of her skill much more often. But the biggest change comes from her yellow potential, returning tide. As long as your skill hits elite enemies or bosses, which is almost always the case, it removes the need to go through the base version entirely. With that, every of her skill casts becomes the ultra version. So instead of cycling through the base versions, your whole rotation turns into ultra version, and then ultra version, cutting the base skill out entirely. In other words, this build makes her damage much more consistent, since you are always using the strongest version of her skill. Now that we understand how her skill works, the next question is, how do we actually play this build? To start simple, you can just leave everything on auto, or spam her skill whenever it's available. It won't be perfect, obviously. You will lose some buffs from Teresa, but it still gets the job done. Just keep one thing in mind, you need to cast your next skill within 6 seconds. Otherwise, you will lose the buff from Serpent in Time, and you have to build it up again. And if you want to push it a little bit further, there is a small optimization that you can do. You can actually pre-stack Serpent in Time before the fight starts. So if the stage gives you some space before engaging the boss, make sure to stack it first. Now, if you want to play this build properly, the key idea is to play around Teresa's shield. You want to use Chitose's skill only when Teresa's shield is active, while still maintaining the 6-second buff from Serpent in Time. And this is where 3 important potentials come in. Starting with, isn't it awesome? When Teresa's shield is active, this gives a massive attack boost over 100% when combined with other 2 potentials. It also doubles the shield duration from 4 seconds to 8 seconds. Next is Hold On. The description is a bit different from how it actually works. So here's what it does. As long as you keep attacking every 4 seconds, it reduces Teresa's skill cooldown down to around 12 or 11 seconds. And when you combine everything, this shield is only down for around 4 seconds between each rotation. So the way you play around this is to line up Chitose's skill with Teresa's shield window. Use one right after the shield goes up, another one in the middle, and the last one right before the shield expires. This lets you maintain Serpent in Time while making sure her main skill benefits from full buffs. The tricky part is knowing when the shield is about to disappear, since you cannot rely on Teresa's skill icon because of the cooldown reduction. You can use indicators like Chitose's skill icon or the in-game timer instead. But personally, I just look at Teresa's animation the moment after she pulls her sword from the ground. that is your cue to use Chitose's last skill in the rotation. So to summarize, during each shield window, you want to use Chitose's skill 3 times. Once right after the shield goes up, once in the middle, and once right before it ends. And that's how you get the most out of her skill in this build. Now, a question that comes up quite often, should you use her ultimate or not? The answer is, well, it depends on how far you want to optimize this build. So let's start with why you would use it. You've probably heard that her ultimate is a DPS loss, and that's true, especially for her auto attack build. That's because her ultimate doesn't deal much damage, and in auto attack build, you are constantly dealing damage. So stopping to use it just lowers your total damage. But for skill build, it is a bit different, because this build gets most of the damage from her skill usage rather than constant attacks. So you can fit her ultimate into your rotation for extra damage if used properly. And that if is very important. The main issue with her ultimate is how long it takes to cast. Without ultimate animation, it takes almost 6 seconds of in-game time, which is long enough to drop your Serpent in Time buff. So to make this work, you need to turn ultimate animation on. And for those who don't know, the ultimate animations of some characters pause the in-game time for a short moment, which effectively makes the ultimate take less in-game time. And that's why some top players keep it on. It's not just for visuals. With animation enabled, the cast time drops to around 5 seconds, and that gives you a small 1 second window to refresh the buff from Serpent in Time. So, your rotation should look like this. Use Chitose's skill first to refresh Serpent in Time, then let it hit briefly, then cast her ultimate right after. And as soon as it finishes, use another skill immediately to maintain the buff. And just like before, make sure you do this while Teresa's shield is active to maximize your damage. So, after all that, is it actually worth it? In terms of numbers, using ultimates adds about 1.5% to her total damage. But at the same time, if you miss-time it and lose your Serpent in Time buff, that's a big DPS loss, and it takes around 12 seconds to build it back up again. So in the end, it's generally not worth it. The gain is small, and the risk of losing the buff is much higher. But if you are consistent and want to push for maximum damage, then yeah, you can still go for it. Now for skill priority, you want to max her main skill first, since that's where most of her damage comes from. As for her auto attack, it doesn't contribute much in this build, so you can leave it at level 4 or 7 breakpoint. For her ultimate, it depends on what we discussed earlier. If you don't plan to use it, you can just leave it as is. But if you do want to include it, upgrade it to a breakpoint depending on how much you want to invest. Now for the rest of the team, starting with Donna, only upgrade her support skill since that's her main source of damage. You can leave her ultimate as is or bring it up to a breakpoint if you want a bit of extra damage. For Teresa and Iris, you don't really need to upgrade anything. You can take them to a breakpoint for some extra damage as well if you want, but overall, it's not something I would recommend. Now let's move on to her team and build. If you have Donna, then you already have the best team for Chitose's skill build. If not, Iris is still a viable alternative. She provides good buffs like attack buff and acqua damage taken similar to Donna, just without extra damage contribution. Some of you might be wondering, what about Freesia? Based on the numbers, she is actually not a good option for this build. Her value as a support is mainly for Chitose's auto attack build, not the skill build. So if possible, you want to run Donna in this team. With that in mind, let's take a look at the build starting with Chitose, Donna, and Teresa. As usual, I will focus on the important potentials. If there's anything I don't cover, feel free to ask in the comments. Starting with Chitose, all of her key potentials here boost her skill damage, so they are pretty straightforward. Just pick them up and upgrade them based on priority. The only exception is returning tide. We mainly need it for utility, as mentioned in the skill build section, and it doesn't scale very well, so you don't need to upgrade it beyond level 1. Moving on to Donna, you absolutely want Frostbitten Arrow, and you should max it, since it's the only source of aqua damage taken in this team, and that makes it the most important potential here. For the last slot, you will choose between Messenger Arrow or Aquatic Assault combo. Both are viable, but they work differently. Messenger Arrow focuses on buffing Chitose, while Aquatic Assault combo gives more personal damage to Donna and is also easier to play, so it's generally more comfortable option. Now for Teresa, I already covered her key potential in the earlier section, so you can refer back to that. But there is one important thing to highlight. Do not take Search Immortality for the skill build. It will lock Teresa into her animation, which prevents you from recasting her skill even after the cooldown is ready. You might be used to this from auto attack build, but here, it will completely ruin your rotation if you pick it. Let's take a look at emblem recommendations, starting with Chitose. Your first priority is main skill plus 3, since that alone gives around 20% damage increase. After that, focus on Pen, Crit Rate, Flowing Circle, and Serpentine Tide, then aqua damage. You can also pick up skill damage, but it's already heavily stacked from her potentials, so it's not as valuable here. Moving on to Donna, start with support skill plus 3 and 20% skill damage, as they give a strong boost to her damage. After that, you can look for a higher roll like Pen and Crit Rate. For level 90, Arrow Pursuit is the best option for her personal damage, followed by Frostbitten Arrow. However, for overall team damage, Frostbitten Arrow is the best here, since it increases the entire team's damage by 16%. Finally, for Teresa, you don't really need to invest into her emblems, since they don't contribute much to the team. But if you want to do that, just get enough charge efficiency to consistently cast her ultimate for the third or fourth time, and you can stop there. Now let's move on to this. Chitose's signature disc is a strong option. It's roughly 10% better than the best free-to-play option. And since Aqua doesn't have many good disc options, it's a very solid pool overall. One important thing to note is that Freesia's signature can actually outperform C6 Cataclysm, especially if you already have other discs with aqua damage in your setup. And that's because you are already getting a lot of aqua damage from other discs, while skill damage from Freesia signatures is more impactful, so keep that in mind when choosing between the two. And if you are lacking good aqua discs and don't mind spending a bit, the Battle Pass disc is also a solid option. And as usual, I will include the full list with all C6 and C1 options at the end of this section. For support discs, just follow the list shown here, since there aren't many strong alternatives. And in many cases, you will likely end up using off-element event discs as well. Now for her talents, if you are planning to pull for them, there are a couple of important things you need to know. First, her T1 and T4 don't provide much value, mainly because both are tied to her ultimate. And as we discussed earlier, her ultimate is already difficult to use properly, and if you mistime it, it becomes a big DPS loss. Even if you do it perfectly, the gains are quite small. And T1 only gives 30% attack buff for just 20 seconds, which isn't that great, but still usable. On the other hand, T4 only increases the damage of her ultimate by just 22%. And since her ultimate barely does any damage to begin with, it's not really worth it. Because of that, if you are going for copies, T3 is a reasonable place to stop. Or you can go all the way to T5 if you really like her. Which brings us to the most important question. Is she actually worth it? And is she still not good after all these buffs? Well, the answer is yes and no. If you look at total team damage, it's still not that impressive. But the issue isn't really Chitose, and it's not Donna either. Their numbers are actually fine. The real problem is the support. As I mentioned in other videos already, Teresa doesn't provide any aqua damage taken debuff, and her base skill also lacks any kind of buffs that other supports usually have. And you can really see when you look at something like Frostbitten Arrow, its value is extremely high in this team, simply because there is no other source of aqua damage taken here. And that alone already tells you what this team is missing. Also, you might have seen this variation before. where Teresa is replaced by a full support Freesia. In that team, Freesia provides a large amount of aqua damage taken through her potentials and talents. And Chitose is actually on an auto attack build, which is exactly where Teresa in the support slot should be at her best. That should give you a pretty clear idea of where the problem is. And if you are not still convinced, you can look at the numbers from this video, where I only made 2 changes to Teresa to bring her closer to other supports. And that alone was enough to bring Chitose back in line with other DPS units. So for now, Chitose will likely underperform compared to other teams. Not because her own kit, but because Aqua is still missing a proper support in support slot. And once we get a new Aqua support, even a 4-star at the level of other elements, her performance should improve significantly. So to wrap everything up, the buffs to her skill build are actually very significant, and they finally make this build viable. That said, her team options are still quite limited, and she really needs Donna for this build, as other alternatives just don't come close. Her signature disc also has solid value, and since Aqua doesn't have many strong disc options right now, it's a very solid pool. Even then, Chitose herself is still somewhat held back. Compared to other DPS, she is still weaker, and that mostly comes down to a lack of a proper Aqua support. So overall, her skill build is in a much better spot now, but you shouldn't expect her to match top team DPS just yet. Once we get a proper Aqua support, that's when her full potential will really start to show. And that's it for Chitose's skill build guide. If you have any questions or there's something you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments. I read through all of them. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.